On behalf of the International Society for Organization Development and Change, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. My partner in crime, Graham Isaacs, he's on his way. He's from England and he forgot the daylight savings. But we are excited about this webinar. And we would like to introduce you to one of the most passionate professionals in culture, change, and leadership today, Dr. Jerry Glover.
I wouldn't say passionate is a good word, probably most tired.
I like the word passionate. I specifically chose it.
Okay.
I absolutely loved his book, Transcultural Competence, Navigating Cultural Differences in the Global Community, and I highly recommend it. Before we begin today, could we just have a few shout outs on where in the world you are today? I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
I'm in Florida.
I'm in Florida.
Dallas, Texas.
Yay.
Good morning. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Great.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm in Boston.
Okay. Welcome.
Denver, Colorado.
Dallas, Texas.
In Denver, Colorado.
Okay. Texas, Colorado. One person's from California.
Hi, I'm from California. Hi, Kimberly.
Good morning or afternoon.
Oh, it's morning for me.
Okay. Good morning.
Hi, Vicki.
Hi, this is Susie. I'm from Denmark.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you.
Vicki, where in the world are you today? Looks like she's getting set up.
She's in Atlanta.
Oh, okay. So thank you, everyone. Also, can you please share with us what perspective you bring today, whether you're a scholar, practitioner, student, etc.? I'm a scholar practitioner.
I am a practitioner for a corporation.
Okay. Thank
Practitioner, scholar, and student.
Scholar hoping to be a practitioner.
Yay. A grad student, Master of Human Resource Development, soon to be a graduate in August. Congratulations. And I see Grant is from Victoria, Canada. Welcome, Grant. And Amanda from South Carolina. And Grant is a business consultant as well. So feel free, we really would like this to be a conversation today. So feel free to unmute your microphones. And also, we like to see faces. So if you're willing to show your face, that would be wonderful as well. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Jerry Glover. Jerry Glover is a cultural anthropologist who has worked in consulting, research, and education projects around the globe. Jerry is currently an associate of Trompenaars Hampton Turner, consulting on client projects in transcultural competence and e-learning development. He is also an emeritus board member of the International Society for Organization Development and Change, and a former peer review editor of the Organization Development Journal. He was a faculty member of the graduate program in organizational change at Hawaii Pacific University for 27 years, and that is where I met him. He was my professor. Jerry earned his doctoral degree in cultural anthropology from the University of Florida in 1981. Dr. Glover's professional career includes working as a consultant on over 150 change and development initiatives, including corporations, governments, and professional applications such as education, healthcare, military, tourism, and training in locations such as Fiji, New Zealand, Hawaii, the Bahamas, Europe, North America, and many others. He has conducted extensive research on organizational culture, culture change, and cultural dilemmas in sociocultural encounters. He also has numerous publications in the field of change, culture, and leadership. Welcome, Dr. Glover.
Thank you, Kim. I was about to fall asleep during but at any rate, today we asked me to help with this webinar, and we are going to talk today about a very important area for anyone who's involved in change, our culture, our development, or any of those things, the terminology that we're using. I have some very definitive ideas about change and development, and I believe that it's important to realize that change and development is probably one of the most important things we're dealing with today. And some of the ideas that we have, we're going to throw out today are meant to stimulate discussion and stimulate ideas. We are going to use some cases right now. I'm going to give you some cases to look at. We feel like too many people think that there's one best way to do change, and there isn't. And too many people don't accommodate or account for the fact that whatever the social cultural context you're operating in, or the country, or the organization, change cannot be approached in the same way as you did the last time. And so we want to try to illustrate that first. So the cases that we're going to use to illustrate that, hopefully will get you thinking about the fact that if you didn't already realize it, that change is a very complex issue, and change, culture, and leadership are three terms that go together. We don't feel like you can be an effective change agent or organizational development agent or OD person or change management person or whatever the term you want to call. We don't think you can do that effectively unless you're culturally competent, because you're in a sense changing an organization. When you start to change an organization, you're also changing the culture. And change projects involve people who come in as change agents, change leaders, and so forth. And those particular people bring within their own cultural baggage about what the change might be, how they would go about it, and how the change should be implemented into the particular organization. So for that reason, we want to give you some cases to stimulate some thinking. So if you don't mind, I'm going to run through some cases with you fairly quickly. These are all cases from my own experience. And as Kim mentioned, I've worked in about 150 different change initiatives around the world over my career. And I found that to be the most exciting part of my career, not teaching in an academic institution and not dealing with professional organizations, but I think getting out in the real world and dealing with change as it is. And the reason why I could justify traveling all over the place and doing that is because that's my field, change. So it was great, because that's what I used to tell our university president when I would take off for a month trip to somewhere like Fiji or whatever. And he would say, go ahead, as long as you're, doing what you should. And change being my field, I really had to get out and do it that way. So at any rate, if you don't mind, I'm going to switch to, and once again, we'll have a point to stop and discuss these cases, but give me an opportunity to buzz through them real quickly with you, and then we'll come back, because I want to show you that change and culture and leadership are an important aspect of what we're doing, and that they have to be considered together. Okay, so let me get that. Now, hold on. Can everyone see that okay? Anyone who has any problems, let us know. So what we're looking at is those three concepts, and we don't think they should be separated. We don't think that they can be separated and people be effective. it's one of the most important areas that we can look at in the field of change and development is the whole concept of culture and how it interacts. Worldviews and values influence change and development models, and they can vary by profession, discipline, nation, religion, industry, and many other ways. And as I said before, change agents bring their cultural baggage into the process. One of the things that all interventions have in common is they're based on some change model, and that change model is based on someone's cultural values about the way the world should be if that particular implementation of change occurs successfully. They all occur in some sort of social cultural context with diverse stakeholders with different perceptions and worldviews. The interesting thing, though, is according to most studies, about 75% of change initiatives fail. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that, there's quite a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is that culture isn't considered. Okay. And change and development professionals hold their own ideas about what's right and wrong and so forth, and what the change should be.
Jerry?
Excuse me?
Jerry, can you do me a favor and put your slideshow on?
I'd rather not.
Oh, okay, fine.
Okay, thank you. I can do this though. How about that?
Oh, that sounds.
I like to know what's on the left-hand side. So
okay.
Everybody's okay with that. I don't want to just stand and throw out ideas. I want us to get to the point where we can.
That helps me see it better. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Can everyone see okay now? There's no one best way for designing change and implementation. Here's some examples. I'll get to these in a minute. We're going to go through. I'm going to show you some videos and so forth, and then we'll get to discussing what. I'd like to hold the discussion because I'm not going to present the entire case of each one of these examples. I've got around 10 of them, and I'm going to show you these things, and then we'll come back and discuss them. Okay, so be thinking about which one you're most interested in discussing as we're going through here. Some of you may recognize John Cleese. This was from a movie that he did back in the late 90s, I think it was, called Fierce Creatures. And he is playing the role of Rollo Lee, who has been sent to manage the takeover of a zoo that has been purchased by a large multinational company. And this is a video from the movie that shows him interacting as a new manager, takeover manager, with the staff of the zoo. So let's just watch this, and you'll hopefully be able to see what I'm saying in terms of change in culture being important.
Big cats over there, right? Yes. And small mammal house there. That's right. Good. Mammals.
Have you any background in animals?
Well, I've eaten a lot, you know. Sorry, joke. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Now, for those of you who have not met me yet, my name is Rollo Lee, and as of yesterday morning, I have assumed command of this zoo. And I shall be reporting to our new owners, Octopus Inc. of Atlanta. Now, Octopus, of course, is owned by Mr. Rod McCain, who, as I'm sure you are aware, is a remarkable man. Starting with his father's radio stations in New Zealand, he has built up a global empire, currently worth more than $6 billion and growing. How much does he want in the end? Yeah. What? How much bigger does he want to get? Well, there aren't any limits. He wants growth. Presumably, he's aware of Dr. E.F. Schumacher's concept of limited resources, or as Jean-Paul Sartre puts it, any sensible questions. Yes.
Are you going to close the zoo?
Yeah. Well, I'm very glad you asked me that. No, you're not. Yes, I am. No. Now, look. This zoo has to make money. It does. Yes, but not enough. Enough for what? Now, don't. Actually, I will tell you precisely. Mr. McCain requires a 20% return on capital on each and every asset in his empire. Why 20%? Because he does, that's why. Could we explore that thinking a little? Yeah. No? I thought not. despite the fact that current management theory regards... Now, the big problem is this. How do we cut costs and attract more visitors? Well, I'll tell you from my experience in Octopus Television exactly what draws the biggest audiences all over the world. Violence. Oh, yes. Mr. Sylvester Stallone did not get where he is today by playing in Jane Austen. Therefore, in this zoo, we require only animals that are potentially violent, fierce animals. All the rest, I'm afraid, will have to go. What do you mean, go? Well, we'll have to find other homes for them.
What? Outside the zoo? This zoo is dedicated to conservation.
And I am all in favor of conservation, and the three things that I want to conserve are this, your jobs, and fierce big cats over there.
Okay. That particular video is part of a very funny movie. If you haven't seen it, I still recommend you find it through on demand or something like that. But what the values were there, of course, was the takeover company meshing with a traditionally run zoo, and the employees had very different values coming into the meeting than did the takeover manager. One of them was the universal need to make 20% profit. That was the universal expectation on the part of the owner, Rod McCain. And the zookeepers were saying, of course, that, you know, that wasn't what they were accustomed to. So you can see the culture and the change coming out in that particular case. Let me go to another case, if you will. Someone has a mic going on right now. I'm not sure where that sound is coming from, but there's some sort of a mic if you can, and you think that mic might be yours, if you could just mute it, that'd be great. The next case I want to bring to you is from the Kingdom of Tonga. I was actually a consultant to the Tongan government at one time. They had a problem in that they had started growing squash pumpkins as a major agricultural product. And as the pumpkins were sent to Japan, who were their primarily importers, 30% of the pumpkins were rejected for quality reasons. And we went there under U.S. Forest Service funding to help the Tongan government, worked with them, with agricultural extension agents, farmers, leaders, and so forth, to improve this reject rate, because it was very much a big part of the country's new economic strategy to export these pumpkins. When we got there, we spent probably 6 months total in and out. And the people on our team were very heavy into empowerment, participative management, and all those types of things where you listen to other people and you get them involved and you bring about results. A very popular thing in the States, particularly at the time, and that's where most of our team came from. However, once we went through the whole idea of process, we went through and identified the processes involved in this. We came up with 52 different key processes that were involved, anything from how they would cut the pumpkins off the stem to how they were stored for shipping, to any number of things that related to what might be causing the quality issues. Interesting thing is, we went back to Hawaii. We were sitting and had lunch with the Minister of Agriculture who came through there after the next harvest, and we wanted to know what happened. Well, the fact is that the reject rate went from 30% down to 5%, and very drastic results in a positive way. Probably the most successful project I've ever been involved in. And the interesting thing is that I had almost nothing to do with the results. It was really the particular sociocultural context of Tonga is they had a king who was beloved and very much of an autocratic leader. He was told what the problems were in terms of the processes, and he made laws for all of them and said, as of now, everyone will do things this way. So instead of storing the pumpkins out in the heat on the dock in Nuku'alofa, waiting for the ships to come in and take them out, they were stored in a more a nicer climate, and there was shade, and there was they were not taken there to be stored and sitting out in the hot sun for 2 or 3 days. So things like that, things like cutting the stems correctly, all the things that we had talked about, he just made it a law. And in that type of autocratic culture, it worked. So autocratic culture was very important. The scripted power of the king was very important. And empowerment had very little to do with it. Okay, and participative management had very little to do with the results. Did everyone benefit? Yeah, the country benefited greatly. And so there's the issue there of saying, okay, why didn't we think in advance and use the culture that was there to bring about the change? Well, because many times change agents are caught up so much in their own models of the way things should be done that they overlook that there are other ways to do things, and particularly when you're going across borders or across countries. Another case comes from this new manager that I worked with some in Hawaii, who had come from the U.S. mainland. He had been trained, of course, in an MBA program, and he came in with the idea that he was going to make some changes when he took over his role in his part of the hotel that he was working in. He came up with a plan to get the housekeepers to work by themselves rather than as a group. Most of the housekeepers were Filipino, and they were used to group work. Well, once he did that, he came back and put the plan in place, and the housekeepers went to the union rep, and there was a union grievance against him his first 6 months on the job. What was the problem here? Well, he didn't go in and realize that the housekeepers were used to working collectively, and they had that system under control. His new system was supposed to increase productivity. It actually lowered it, and the morale went down considerably, and they had some union actions against him. Okay, obviously that's a matter of change agents coming in with their own models and their own cultural baggage. I want to bring up the case of Jan Carlson, and who back in the 80s was the president of Scandinavian Airlines System. Many people read his book, and at the time, Scandinavian Airlines, SAS, had become an example of a good turnaround company. It's not so much about SAS, but what he said, I think, was very important. And he said that basically his airline had millions of moments of truth every day where they could actually win the customers or not win them. And he said that in a sense, in a service experience like the airlines have, that it's important for them to manage and to develop these moments of truth with customers. And I brought this up as a case just simply because I think it's such an important thing to think about, particularly in service businesses, in that there are all these moments of truth going on all the time, and the customers are reacting to their experience with that company based on how those moments of truth go.
Jerry, that's the name of his book, right?
Yeah.
Moments of Truth.
Yep.
By Jan Carlson.
Yep.
Okay.
Let me bring to you another case. And as I said, I'm going through this quickly. We'll stop and come back to the ones that you want to talk about. This one is about a cruise ship company that was operating in the Yasawa Islands and off of Fiji. I was asked to evaluate their product, and one of the main issues that came up, we found, was reef damage being done. And the reef damage was being done by continual dropping of anchors over reefs for the cruise ships who were coming into this area. And the values that came up were basically preserve the reef or have more cruise ships. Well, the situation became quite dramatic at the local villagers, the government, the cruise ship owners. All these people were involved in this issue because the concern was that they were damaging the reef. And if they damaged the reef, part of the reason why tourists came there would be a problem. And so I'll tell you briefly what happened was they came up with a reconciled solution that we presented in the meetings, and that was to set up mooring buoys outside the reef so the cruises could tie off to the mooring buoy as opposed to dropping reefs on the anchors. It was something that was outside the range of what they were thinking about, and that's why sometimes it's important to reconcile these issues, the dilemmas, so that you come up with new answers. But once again, in all these cases, I hope you're seeing that culture and change go hand in hand. This one is about a sales and marketing and vice president and accounting vice president disagreed about whether or not you gave exceptions. The first case was one in terms of a meeting planner at a hotel. The second one was an insurance company asking for an exception on a loan. The interesting thing that came out of that particular case of change is that we found that functional differences among the accounting and the HR people, and the sales people, were as much as 100% different. The sales and marketing people said, do anything you can to please the customer. The accounting people said, rules are rules, you can't change it. Of course, both of them were right. And the important thing is that when we were sitting in a meeting discussing this, they looked at their vision statement, and it said that they would be a leader in exceeding their customers' expectations. Of course, then that means that the sales people tend to be more related to that. The interesting thing is that many companies have vision statements, mission statements, strategic plans, and so forth. But when you take it down to the operational level, such as giving an exception to a rule, you find that those rules and how they're handled aren't always handled the same, and depending on the functional area. So I present that as another case. There's also a case that when I first went to the Bahamas to work there, a waiter came by, gave us great service, and I was talking to the manager of the food and beverage department, and he complained and said, you know, the hotel staff was surly, nasty, not giving good service. And I told him, well, that doesn't seem to be correct, because the waiter that just waited on us gave great service. And the manager sort of looked at me and grimaced and said, yeah, but it was his first day on the job. He hasn't learned to be like all the rest of the employees. Sure enough, we came back 2 weeks later, and he was surly, nasty, and didn't give us good service. So organizational culture and the ability to deal with service problems or employee problems comes back to the fact that, you know, the existing staff is the organizational culture, or part of the organizational culture, the workplace culture, and they have to be dealt with, not just with a single employee like the new employee we're talking about. Another thing that's a pet peeve to me is that when technology is interfaced into the service system, that we had to deal with call systems. And I'm sure all of you somewhere along the line have said, representative, please. And that particular frustration on the part of consumers is a widely experienced frustration. The people who put these systems in are more interested in saving money in terms of labor costs, rightfully so. They assume that they're putting in a system that's going to provide better service, but often those systems don't. And so I bring that case in. Once when I was working in the Bahamas, we were looking at the exchange rate, at the guest comments who were leaving the country. They would always ask if they would rate the product of tourism in the Bahamas. They still do that, by the way, many years later. But we found that many people thought that the front desk clerks were rude. But what it turned out to be, as we investigated more, is the Bahamian employees were taught as they were growing up by authority figures, parents, grandparents, and so forth, if they were being scolded or someone was upset with them, don't look at me when I'm talking to you. But the tourists from North America had been raised where they were told, look at me when I'm talking to you. So what was happening at the front office in the hotels is that if a guest came in and complained and was upset, that the Bahamian would tend to look away because they were an authority figure they were dealing with, and they would look away. And the more they looked away, the more the tourists would get upset and raise their voice. So a simple little interaction issue there in terms of fixing what had been a real complaint going on. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a video from a scene in Japan where an American executive is there and ends up meeting with his sales staff.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Before we break this up, I'd like to make an announcement. I hope you'll excuse me for speaking in English, but as most of you know, my Japanese isn't very good. You all know Tommy Wakayama. I'm sure you all like and respect him as much as I do. Well, since I arrived here a month and a half ago, I've been very aware of Tommy's fine performance in every aspect of his job. Tommy's the kind of worker we like to see back at headquarters. He's a real go-getter. But more than that, he has the ability to function creatively, to use his own intelligence and initiative. Therefore, it's with great pride that I'm announcing the creation of a brand new position, chief of our marketing group, and promoting to that position the man I feel is best qualified. Stand up, Tommy. Let me be the first to shake your hand. Congratulations. Keep up the good work. Thank you, John-san.
Okay, what happened in this scene was, of course, that the American expatriate manager had promoted a younger member of the group, not giving any attention to the fact that the other members were more experienced and had more scribe status. And the result was that there was a decrease in the productivity of the sales group instead of an increase. Tommy Yakadama had been an achiever, a young achiever. And I've seen this around the world quite a bit. I saw it in a gold mine in Fiji, for example, where the young achieving Fijian men had been promoted to supervisors by the expatriates who were working there from South Africa and Australia, because they thought they were working in an achievement organization oriented culture, when in fact the culture was one run on ascription. So when these young Fijians would go back to their village at night, they would be working in a different environment, and that environment often had the people they were supervising in the workplace. Those people were the chiefs in the village, and they were elders, and they were also the system didn't work very well because the young supervisors learned that they couldn't push around or demand or expect anything from the chiefs who were there, because when they went home that evening, they were going to catch all kinds of problems. Okay. One thing, once in Puerto Rico, I was working at the restaurant where they had managers who had asked me to talk to a group of employees, waiters, and they complained that the productivity of the new technology point of sale system was actually creating problems. We found out, long story short, that the system, of course, the waiters put the orders in on the floor, and they said, but we have to then go into the kitchen and tell them, the cooks, what we put in. Turned out that the cooks couldn't read, but the technology implementation firm had never checked to find out that, and the waiters were simply covering for the cooks because they had worked with them for many years. And the fact is, had the technology firm done their due diligence, they would have put in a system that didn't rely on the waiters having to do double work. Okay. Probably the best case that I have, and the last one I'm going to show you, is one from a hotel where I went, and it actually was the region of Fiji at the time, and it was a fantastic place, just a wonderful product. And I'd traveled around the world quite a bit by then, and I was so impressed. I went in and I met the general manager. He had only been there a few months, and I said, "What in the world did you do here to create such a wonderful product?" He said, "Well, when I got here, I saw how great it was, and I did absolutely nothing." And that perhaps is one of the hardest things for managers to do when they come into a new assignment, just not put any change in at all. That took a lot of insight and a lot of thought, and I was so impressed with that. And I very rarely have ever heard anyone say that. Usually a new manager wants to put all kinds of changes in and do all sorts of things. But when he got there, he was smart enough and aware enough to know that he didn't need to do anything. Okay, takes a lot of thought. Okay, so just as a summary, change models can be autocratic, they can be participative, they can involve collaboration or not. They can be top-down, bottom-up. They can be innovation diffusion, where you're spreading ideas. They can be technology-driven. They can be religious-based, politically-based, and many other ways. So change models have all sorts of influences on their design. And if you look, some of the most common labels given to culture change and leadership over the years, I won't read them to you, but you can see over the last several decades, we've had a lot of things that have come along as an influence on a change model. And all of them have been part of the way things have been being done in the change environment. What's most important about change models is that they be culturally relative and that they use a holistic approach and that we understand our own cultural baggage and predispositions. And so what are some of the things about change initiatives? First of all, we need to understand who's leading the change, why it's being done, and what is the context. Who are the stakeholders, and how do they see the change process and the outcome? What are the cultural influences about the change model as designed? What are the cultural values influencing the change process? And how will the change model be communicated to the intended recipients? How will cultural differences be recognized, respected, and resolved? And how will the progress and the eventual outcomes be measured? And what are the potential unintended outcomes of the intervention? That particularly comes into play when we don't consider that different people are influenced differently in change processes.
Jerry?
I know the change model is different, but so is the process. Yep.
Jerry, I had a question. So what do you,
Well,
my
I'm not
question.
ready for change questions yet, Kim. So let me.
Okay, fine. It was a burning one though.
No, I'll let it burn a little more. Final slide I want to show you, and then we can come back to it, Kim.
All right.
That this is an example of meetings. And I like to use this slide because it shows 4 different cultures, 4 different sociocultural contexts in which meetings are occurring and in which stakeholders obviously have probably different values and expectations. So if you're looking just at meetings alone, you can find that it's very important to understand the differences between the different contexts you might be operating in. Okay, now, Kim, go ahead to you.
So my question was, what do you recommend as first steps when you are going into a consulting environment?
Well, as a first step, I would recommend that you don't assume that all change happens in the same way and that there's no one best way.
Okay. And would you recommend asking those questions that you had on the earlier slide?
One of the reasons why I'm a professor, I'm a board member in emeritus at ISODC is because they got tired of hearing me harp about the fact that OD isn't done the same way in different places, and that change management isn't done the same way in the same places. And I got to the point where I think they finally decided to make me an emeritus board member so they could get me off the board and they wouldn't have to hear me say that anymore. Okay.
All right. Tracy has raised her hand and she has a question.
Okay,
Hi.
Tracy.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Is my mic working okay?
Can hear you
Can
just
you hear me
fine.
okay? Perfect. So I see a lot of, I loved seeing these cases and really appreciated it. In my situation, you know, I'm a global change leader. I'm in an organization that's in 43 countries.
Wow.
So all these projects, like one I just came off of, the project stretches from Asia to North America to South America to Europe. What advice do you have for that when it's across many cultures?
Yep. Well, that's not uncommon. I know many examples of companies whose headquarters might be in California, and they put together for example, a performance appraisal system, and they send it to Korea and Japan, and other locations that have totally different cultural values. And suddenly they're surprised that their individualistic, achievement-oriented performance appraisal system doesn't work as well there as it did back maybe in LA. So my first advice would be to know the cultural context of the locations where your company is operating, and to know the workforce and their values, and to realize and perhaps convince the people who are leading change in any of those contexts that they have to consider the change model first, and then of course the different stakeholders involved, and then they have to consider the fit of the change model with the local context. I don't know if that's, I mean, there's obviously you've got many things to think about, but that might be a quick thing. And I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, it's very helpful. And you know, the challenge, of course, is, I mean, when I hear you talking, it seems to me is it's almost like take your time and understand the people. Don't think, and on these large, big projects where it's not just in one location, that means the project's going to take longer. But it's like that pay now, pay later, right?
Well,
you have to decide that.
It doesn't necessarily have to take longer, but you have to take a different slant on the change. I think it has to be more of a, well, let me say this, put it another way. One of the reasons why people jump on change initiatives like organizational development or whatever collaborative means or whatever means they want to use is because it's easier that way. Because you've got this one model and you just try to force it in everywhere. And I think that's probably what you want to try to prevent people from doing. Fact is that you may have some universal things in your company that you want to maintain no matter what country or place you're operating in, and that's all fine. But there has to be also a consideration for local context and for not just national context, but also things like functional differences. I did studies of around 34 organizational cultures back, earlier in my career. And one of the things that we were surprised to find is that there probably are greater differences among functional areas like accounting, finance, sales and marketing, and so forth, than there were among the national differences in that company, in those companies. And so cultural variation can come from a lot of different areas. And of course, why is cultural variation important in change? Because obviously it affects how you go about creating the change. My favorite project, I think I mentioned, was the Tongan case, simply because I was able to come back and tell everybody I had absolutely nothing to do with it, and use it as an illustration of why it's important to understand the local context.
Great, thank you.
I don't know if that's, obviously we could talk about this for a couple of weeks.
Sure. Thank you. No, that gave me some good things to think about. Thank you.
Sure.
Jerry, in your book, you talk about the 4 major aspects of transcultural competence: recognition, respect, reconciliation, and realization. Yeah. Would you consider those being part of your due diligence process?
Well, that's really more what we use as a means of trying to distinguish between levels of cultural competence. Our first time we become culturally competent is when we learn our own culture as an infant, as a child growing up. You're learning a culture, and when you don't behave according to its expectations, you find out about it in terms of feedback from other members. The next time you may encounter cultural competence, the second level, you may encounter people who are different from you. Then you have to learn about them. You can take the response of ignoring them or criticizing them or feeling like they're bad or debased or wrong because they're different from you, or you can learn more about it. Third level, of course, is when you're dealing with multicultural situations, then there may be many stakeholders. But the level of cultural competence that we advocate is the 4th level, and that's one where you have an understanding of culture and change in this particular situation to the point where you are not tied to a particular model or one best way fit, okay? And that you are able to adapt to the different settings you might find yourself in. So, yeah, it's important.
Jay French has a question.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ari, for your presentation so far. It has been very insightful.
Thank you for having your camera on. It's great to be able to speak to you.
Thank you. My name is Giselle French, by the way. I just put J French, my shirt. But my question to you is, when in all the case studies that you presented, it was obviously there was some sort of conflicting values at play from different units or different leaders or different cultures and whatnot. And then it was always immersed in a problem within a system. So it was so my question to you is, oftentimes we do org design, like interventions that are one-offs and whatnot, and then we leave it to change management to program through different stages of change and whatnot. What I have been trying to tap into is in using more like org design elements to try to do the diagnosis via the entire system. And of course, none of the models that I know so far explicitly talk about the external system, so to speak, or the culture of the countries and whatnot. But I was wondering, what's your take on that? And then if you know of any particular models that may be good to that end.
Okay, I think the whole idea of organizational design, it depends on who it is that's talking about it and what model they're using and everything. But I find in many cases organizational design can be somewhat universalistic in its approach. And I think that if you look at the other side of it, I think organizational design can be very culturally relevant. And if you look at the fact what you're trying to do when you're reconciling cultural differences in these situations, is you're trying to come up with a new way, a new social understanding about what should be done in that situation. And the reason why there's a conflict or a dilemma there is because the existing cultural expectations and existing cultural values have not been reconciled to the point where there's some way that's come out. I mentioned the whole idea of the mooring buoy and the cruise ship company. That wasn't thought of before. So they were fighting among themselves between the owner and the environmentalists because they both had their own position to defend. Okay, but what I like about Trumpinger's and Hampton Turner's ideas about reconciliation is you come up with a new social design, and that simply is a matter of coming up with something that maybe wasn't thought of before. And I like to call it, instead of calling it thinking outside the box, I like to call it creating a new box. Because if you're thinking outside the box is still there. What I like to do is say, okay, the stakeholders in the situation, including the change agent, comes up with a new idea about how you should handle this situation in which all the stakeholders somehow feel some ownership in it. And it also manages to take the best of their ideas and make up a new design or a new box, if you will. Okay. And so that part, to me, that's real social design and real organizational design, because you're dealing with it at the operational level. And all mission statements and vision statements and value statements, somehow, if you get to the operational level, they should be happening. But unfortunately, what you find is there's a lot of dilemmas going on at the operational level, of which most behaviors may not be consistent with the values of the vision. Okay? And I can guarantee you, most organizations you can go into, you can find that incongruence all over the place. And yet it's funny because they'll sit and many executives will go away for weekends and decide what the company's values are. But yet they don't think about what the values of the employees are, the customers, or any of the other people involved, or the people who are the suppliers, or any people in that stakeholder chain, if you will. And it's funny that they think that they are the ones that should decide what the values are and not necessarily tell the rest of the people until later.
Vicki, did you have something to share?
Vicki.
Oh, I'm just so relating to everything that's being said and a lot of the questions that are being asked. I just shared in chat, one of my clients is implementing a large change initiative with their top leadership in 4 countries. And we found that just by having them participate in the process, we kind of naturally gathered some of the cultural context. So we had them all come together in 3 countries and actually participate in what did they want to see as 5 leadership principles for working effectively across culture. And that way, when we rolled out the 5 principles, all 150 of the senior leadership had helped to create them.
Yeah.
That really made a big difference.
Yeah, that's a great case there. I know the work Vicky's doing, and it's great stuff. One other thing I might mention that just occurred to me is one of the things that's very under-discussed, if you will. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but I don't care anymore because I'm not in a university anymore. But one of the things that's not really dealt with adequately in the field, I think, is power. And I think the effective manipulation of power in a change situation is critical. Because if you don't effectively manipulate, and I use manipulation on purpose, okay, if you don't effectively find a way to manipulate the power system, then chances are that power system is going to operate against you. And there's nothing devious about what I'm saying. I'm simply saying if you ignore power as an element, then chances are there'll be problems. The Tongan example, once again, I go back to that. The great thing was the king had the power. The king said, okay, this is law, and that's it. And we got change. And I love that because that caused me to coin the phrase, which I said the best way to implement participative management is through authoritarian means. Yeah, that was a joke. At any rate, it's true.
Yeah, it is true. It is. Jerry, I really love in your book the section called Creating New Boxes. First of all, the whole section is wonderful. It's on page 148. Did you get a commission
on that book, by the way?
Oh, yes, yeah, okay, right here. Okay. But there's one paragraph. It says, if there is one catalyst for transcultural competence in individuals and their organizations, it is decision-making. Adaptive and sustainable success rests with the quality and cultural appropriateness of the decisions that are made by leaders in government, community, and corporate organizations in the face of challenging dilemmas with no right or wrong answers, but that vary in their adaptive outcomes.
Okay.
I like those words. I like them a lot. So I think it's just very important that leaders, they scan their horizons and, as has been said earlier, do their due diligence.
Well, the problem is with leaders like academics is they're all trained to follow a particular way of seeing the world and to do things, and that includes change. And so what you find is one cadre of academics being trained by the previous academics who were their teachers, and it goes on and on. They perpetuate the system of ineffectiveness and inefficiency, and particularly when it comes to change. Change, probably more than any other area, needs some really good thought leaders. And unfortunately, what we have is a bunch of gurus running around selling books about their particular vision of change. And unfortunately, that's to me, one of the number one problems with change management and organizational development and all those particular areas that profess to deal with change. I've had fight after fight of people at OD conferences, and I'm not an OD person. I've had many arguments where I've discussed the idea that OD is not OD everywhere. OD changes in terms of its needs and in terms of the way you do it. And it's somewhat of a foolish attempt to take models developed in the U.S. and try to apply them in certain areas of Africa, for example, or certain areas of Asia or whatever. And I've seen too many people do that, and unfortunately, it doesn't work. And the cost is great. Yes.
Giuselli.
Giuselli, okay. I got the J, I didn't get the rest.
Thank you so much. To that point, one of the questions that I have, and it's talking about, our biases and our natural inclinations. So in OD, we want to make it more democratic and participatory. But I began thinking about the case that you shared with us, and then how systems where there's more of an autocratic viewpoint, where going directly to the people to figure out how, what they think or experience or whatnot, may be uncomfortable for them because culturally it's not the way that they process. How do you, what is your experience on that? How do you go about involving them without necessarily damaging something that for them is valuable? Because there's a reason why there's.
You talk about the stakeholders for change who might not have the power or the leadership.
Yes.
That's an interesting question because that varies in terms of how people look at how do you involve people. One of the things that I learned in working in the South Pacific, and I worked for about 12, 15 years in Fiji, one of the things I learned is we assumed going in there, when we were actually implementing quality management teams in the 90s with a large financial services company there that was the headquarters in Australia, but the local office was fairly large too. And we assumed that they would work with Fijians themselves because they're so collective and so much group oriented that they would work in teams well, but they didn't because they're used to being in meetings, group meetings, but they sat in the village traditionally and heard the elders tell them what was going to happen. And so, yes, they were involved, but they weren't participating in the same manner as we thought they would participate in, and that is questioning things, asking serious questions about quality issues and bringing up suggestions and doing all those things. We expected them to do that immediately, but they didn't. They didn't want to do it. They were not used to it. They weren't comfortable with it. So their idea of a group participation was to sit there and listen to what was going on and not to be involved in the actual dynamics of the issue or the problem that was being discussed. So I bring that up because that, I think, illustrates what you're trying to talk about. We had to deal with it differently. We had to go back in and rethink the way that we dealt with the teams. And so I think, how do you get to people? You really have to think about the organizations and the people involved and what the gaps are there. Ours is a very important part of that. Suzanne.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Glover. I wanted to stress something you said earlier in response to the question she just raised, and really understanding the cultural context in which you're working in deeply, meaning in my time in working with teams in India with a US-based parent company with local offices operating with a client locally that was based in the UK, at first we really struggled in understanding sort of the way in which they express their collectivism. So you just talked about listening to tribal elders and sort of face management and autocratic approach. And in India, there's some of that in the culture, but what's also there is a sort of a back channel approach to participation.
Right.
And I think it's super, I cannot even stress enough how critically important it is to look deeper than what you just see when you first walk in the door and say, how are decisions made? How do people express dissent, that kind of thing. And what we found was when we dug a little bit deeper, we realized that they were expressing dissent through gossip and complaint, sort of chronic complaining without any action. And what I began to do is ask them, how do you solve this problem in your own culture, and sort of helping them make the bridge. So one of the biggest challenges, right? So the UK, the client was Goldman Sachs, and they have a practice of a leadership program where they cycle their leaders through different cultural stopping points.
That's a very good point of how do they actually deal with these things, rather than how does the outside change agent come in and impose their ideas on that doesn't always mean it's going to be bad that an outside change agent wants to do something, but I think it's the bad thing is when they come in and don't recognize or respect the local way of doing things. So I guess in a nutshell, I'm sorry, Suzanne, I guess in a nutshell, what I'm saying in this whole hour, which we're almost out of, and that's the only reason I'm trying to go through a little more quickly. what we have to do is to realize that when culture is integrated with change and leadership, then we have an almost new paradigm of how to go about doing this stuff, which often isn't used. And what you're saying, Suzanne, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead and finish up. Oh, okay. But when you're dealing with India or any of these other countries that are brought up, you need to be able to realize that the change model, the change process itself, how you go about change, the change design, the stakeholders, the cultural context, all those have to be considered. And unfortunately, when we go into looking at the articles about OD and change management and all these things, we don't see it too many times. And if nothing else, it becomes an afterthought. Anyway, I've talked for an hour. So
thank you, everyone. I just want to throw out a couple really quick things before we leave. And I will be sending this information out to everyone who registered for the webinar.
Can I say one thing for you?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
If any of you want to discuss any of these things after this, send me an email. I'll be happy to have a chat with you. I don't mind.
What is your email?
My email is jerryglover75@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you.
But seriously, I'm happy to discuss them with you if you want to talk about them.
Fons Trompenaars, or Trompenaars Hampton Turner, is having a licensee certification. It's in Florida in May 13th and 14th. If you're interested, there is some information here on it, and I will send that out to you. Also, we are coming up with our own cultural competence certificate program. It will be 2 courses. Each course is 4 weeks long, and feel free to email either Jerry or myself at kimjbarker@gmail.com for more information. We invite you all to join our Culture, Change, and Leadership group at LinkedIn. We're trying to have this be have very timely information and very pertinent information. So we'd love it if you would check out that group and join. Also, I do highly recommend Jerry's book, Transcultural Competence. He does, yay, Vicki, he does talk about really a more holistic approach to transcultural competence. And there is a review of that book on my YouTube channel if you're interested, at Kimberley Barker. Lastly, the International Society for Organization Development and Change has sponsored this webinar, and it's an awesome organization. If you're a student, it's free, but it's so reasonably priced that it's almost, it's practically free for everyone. And it's such, because there are so many benefits in this organization, from the OD Journal to newsletters to webinars to conferences. There is a conference next month in Denver, Colorado. You can go to isodc.org for more information on that. And I just really want to thank you, Jerry. Thank you for your time together, and make this a great day, everyone. And please call someone who would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.